to the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find your identity. It's mind over everything.
What is up, everybody? Gate 7 International back at it again with yet another deep dive. This one is for Hwang in-beom. I know you guys have been really excited about this, and it's going to be a little bit different than anything we've done in the past because I have a guest here. I have Patrick Caskie, who you guys may have recognized. He's been on the pod before with the Neftchi Baku pods that we did from last year's Champions League qualification. He's also written some incredible pieces for us on players. He did one for Mady with Breaking the Lines. Very nice piece there. One for Yann M'vila for us and Yorgos Masouras. So I am very happy here to introduce Patrick. Patrick, thank you for joining me. How are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Obviously, I prefer to be on in better circumstances to do with Olympiacos' own pitch performance. But last time I was on, I was a precursor to success. Obviously, Olympiacos went out and fairly comfortably handled Neftchi. So let's see my appearance as a precursor to Hwang in-beom becoming a legend at Olympiacos or whatever, doing his best.
I hope so, man. I hope so. And yeah, that's what we're hoping to do with this deep dive is bring a little bit of positivity and hope into this community that has suffered one of the most embarrassing and its worst defeat in a very, very long time. So we hope you guys are excited because both Patrick and I are very much to get into this deep dive. But before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, hit that like button at the bottom, ring the bell if you want to be notified anytime we go live for more deep dives like this, for more content, more live shows, more pre-matches, more interviews. There's so much more coming, and we're proud to continue to bring this stuff to you. That last show that we did after the terrible loss had over at this point 3,500 views. It's crazy. I mean, before it was over, it had over 1,000 people in it. So the community is growing, whether it's in good times or bad. We're always here for you guys, and we're here to be a center for the fans to get together, and that's never going to change. As always, by the fans, for the fans. Well, I don't want to wait too much longer, Patrick. Let's get into this. Let's get into Hwang in-beom. As most of you guys know already, he is a right-footed box-to-box center mid that also plays as a defensive mid, about 25 years old. The last medical, we have 5'10". That's 177 centimeters. I will tell you that height surprised me from how I saw him play because he didn't look like he was that tall initially on the field. 64 kilograms, only 141 pounds. And let me tell you, he does not play like he's that light of a player.
Yeah, I would corroborate everything you've said. He is quite short and certainly at least appears to be on the footage when you watch him play, but he does have that sort of strong posterior chain that all, especially midfielders and forwards need when you're backing up a player, so like pushing it up when you watch basketball. So he's got the strong hamstrings and most importantly, really, really good balance, which helps both when he's tackling, evading defenders. So he certainly sort of looks lightweight, but he's really not very easy to push around, which is important both for the physicality of the Greek league and in Europe, and both in America when he was playing for, or rather in Canada when he was playing in the MLS for Vancouver, and for Rubin in Russia. He never appeared to be sort of physically subpar to anyone. He always looked like one of the hardest workers and physically capable of taking on anyone.
Absolutely. And he spent, as we mentioned before, most of his career so far has been in that midfield box-to-box role. He's no stranger to defensive duties, though. We see plenty of that in most of his games. He doesn't shy away from any of those responsibilities. Now, last season, he did play primarily for Rubin Kazan in Russia, but he did spend the second half of the year after the invasion in Ukraine at FC Seoul in South Korea. I saw that he had some stints at the attacking mid position as well, even in the right side of the midfield and the left side of the midfield. He's kind of played all over the place. In terms of his mold as a player, I saw very impressive endurance and box-to-box capability for, entire 90-minute periods. And this is for a relegation team. For Rubin Kazan, he was doing that. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think so. Rubin Kazan, especially, they took probably one of outside. So when the invasion happened, Zenit obviously had an excess of a few players, but Rubin Kazan probably had the largest sort of impact in terms of their foreign players' impact or percentage of their like sort of win impact, if that's the best way to put it. They had 5 foreigners who they're incredibly contingent on winning on. in-beom, one of the most important. And when he dipped and went back to Korea and played for FC Seoul, they just kind of fell apart. And I think that's testament to how great of a player he is. He's versatile. He's, I think, a really good way to say is ability is the best. Availability is the best ability, and he's both constantly available, but available to play as a 6, as a defensive midfielder, as an 8, as a box-to-box, and even pushed up as a 10. And he has the skills, and I think it's testament to his well-rounded game set and his physicality to really thrive in either of the 3 positions, which kind of gives you the idea in which you're not signing a player who's in one position. You can really signing a player who can play 3. And this sort of alleviates pressure when someone gets injured. So let's say Camara or Buchalakis or Valbuena gets injured. Hwang and Beom has the ability to sort of fill in one of those positions, any of them. And that's 3 players who on the surface are completely different. But I do think, though, I would agree with Ari and say sort of as a box-to-box sort of 8 is his best, because he's really good at just everything, and you want to be able to maximize his influence, let him get his fingers and hands over everywhere on the pitch. But if you want him to specialize specifically in the attacking third or the defensive third, he can most definitely do that. And I really do think when you play sort of domestic games in the Greek Super League, where you maintain possession between 70 and 80%, he might be best suited as a DM, just get as many attacking players on the pitch as possible, because he's great at progressing the ball from and kind of operating as a communicator between the defensive and middle thirds, and then from the middle to the attacking third. He just has this really nice, compact, well-rounded game that he can fit anywhere, really. And I think it's going to be perfect for both him and his teammates and the fans, because I really do think he's not perhaps the perfect signing if you're giving a carte blanche for Olympiacos, but he comes pretty close to it.
Especially at a budget. And you addressed a lot of things that Lambro was initially asking about. So some foreshadowing, my friends. Target at Lambro, I know, but some foreshadowing for all of you guys. But before we get to what we're foreshadowing at, let's start with the generals, guys. You know how this goes. We're going to start off with goal creation, and I'm going to introduce some lovely data here that has been done by Patrick himself. And Patrick, I'll let you run away with it, man. Tell us about the goal creation we can expect from Hwang and Beom.
Yeah, so in-beom over his sort of 4 full seasons so far, professional football outside of Korea. Obviously, his production in Korea is still important, but I think we can sort of caveat it as he's young and he's playing in a league which is just completely different dynamics-wise. I don't think the MLS is a carbon copy to the Greek Super League, but I do think in terms of sort of median and top quality, it translates sort of well. And he's going to be giving you about like 0.1 to 0.15 goals per game, which is fantastic. I think the most interesting thing to point out on this chart specifically is if you look at the 2 first bars, you see XG per 90. So his expected goals per 90 is at a pretty lowly 0.03, which ranks him in below the 20th percentile for this entire sort of ranking. So to put it simply, there's like, let's say 2,000 midfielders in this rank, and for XG, he ranks below in the bottom 100, or bottom 200 rather. But for actual goals scored, he ranks above the 75th percentile. So he's overperforming his XG, which is in large part due to his pretty good ball striking ability. He can score from outside the box, which is invaluable, especially to teams who, again, are facing sort of 2 blocks of 4 or 5 at the back when they're playing, and really have to unlock a goal from somewhere. And in-beom, albeit not on a game-by-game basis, does provide some sort of danger when he's shooting from distance. And he also is really nice at these like late third-man runs. He'll be sort of offering a decoy. He'll be running in late when someone crosses it in, and he'll just be there, and he'll be there to tap it in. Although he's not going to get you like 10 to 15 goals a season, he does provide a sort of that nice stream of 5 to 6, which are invaluable, because goals from anywhere is incredibly imperative, especially when you come to sort of when you expect to win. You sort of need, despite the sort of contrary wisdom, it says defense wins championships. That's really important in basketball. I do think for teams like Olympiacos or the team I support, Rangers, it's really about scoring the most, because mistakes are inevitable on the defensive end. But if you're able to just overpower other teams who are unable to pick your defense, because you have great centre backs or goalkeeper, you're going to do it by scoring goals, and that ensures sort of an insurance policy on winning. And in-beom's 5 to 6 goals per game, whether played as a 6, 8, or a 10, it's a fantastic insurance policy.
Now, the one question I'll have regarding the actual goal threat, not the assists, the goals as we're talking about, do you find that his goal scoring ability is sustainable and that Olympiacos fans can find that to be sustainable? And I only ask that because in the goals that I scored, especially in the recent season, the season before, I saw a lot that came from whether it was an awkward bounce or perhaps some awkward movement from the defensive end that threw the goalkeeper off, things like that. A defensive error on the opposing team, we'll call that. Do you see that as sustainable in his goal scoring ability, or do you foresee that it's possible that he doesn't maintain that goal scoring?
No, I think this is a really interesting sort of dilemma to consider, because we need to sort of differentiate between reflection and projection. So if you reflect on what's happened, he's overperformed what he should have done, and that is inherently unsustainable to the point where it's like 400% of his XG. But then you have to consider when we're projecting his sustainability, he's coming to Olympiakos, who are by far and away the best team in Greece, despite what last night's result would suggest. And he will be playing in a team who are going to get 20% more possession, twice as many shots, and he'll be allowed to play in that final third for probably 4 times as much actual game time, and he'll get more shots. So he will probably be able to maintain this overperformance per se, like the actual goals per 90. But I do think relative, he will be able to sustain the goals he has here on a sort of regular performance, because it happens when you see any player go from a sort of poor team to a very good team, their numbers naturally inflate because they're given so many more chances. So I would say if we're sort of projecting an idea, I do think he'll be able to sustain that like 0.12 goals per 90 he got last season. And just because it's the nature of playing for Olympiacos and playing against weaker opposition with stronger teammates.
Right, and that makes complete sense. And regarding his shooting ability, and this is something that I know people are going to remark on because I saw it in the deep dive, and I can't imagine he's going to strengthen that much in the offseason. I noticed that when it came to his shots, whether it was the long distance shots or even we'll say medium distance, a little bit inside the penalty box area, not quite at the penalty area, but on that edge, placement I thought was fantastic, better than impressive, better than I expected. But shot power was not quite as strong as maybe some players we already have on the team in terms of what like people like to call lasers that get shot on frame. What do you think about that in terms of his shot power and placement?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. When I alluded to ball striking earlier, that was probably, I could have chosen a better word. I agree with the sort of ball striking and so as where he places the ball. It kind of is just reminiscent or sort of a continuation of his really nice and silky in possession game. It's almost like his really nice passing and line breaking passes, his cross field passes, sort of just communicate into when he's shooting, he places it really well. And even from distance, he gets the requisite power so that he doesn't need to absolutely bang it or smash it because he's found the bottom corner, but he could hit it with a bit more power at some point. But I do think, like many players in the sort of new generations of Korean football, there is this sort of focus on sort of quality over quantity in terms of both placement and power. They're really silky players. You can see, especially with the Japanese players who have come to Europe recently, there's quite a few in Belgium. They're really sound technical players, and they're sort of, instead of taking a massive physical approach to it, ball striking or any sort of the game, really, it's a technical approach. And I do think when you have so many players who strike it really hard, I think Masura strikes quite well, Camara as well, the sort of versatility in shooting approaches forces the goalkeeper or the prospective goalkeepers not to be able to just think, I need to go to the ball as quick as possible, because now we need to consider spin, counter spin, knuckling it, placement. So I do think a variety of shooting options is perfect, and it's always a great thing to have. But I do think it is fair that at some points he is trying to be overly cute and tries to pass the ball into the back of the net, which is very consequential for Ruben because they would average like 6 shots a game. But Olympiacos are getting twice as many, although that wouldn't ring true in Europe.
Now, really quickly, before we move on to some of his possession and build-up stuff, how do you remark on his, we'll say, assist creation or shot assist creation?
Yeah, I think it's, at least in Scotland, we call it a hockey assist. I think in Y-Scout, their definition is second assist. I think his final ball is good. You can see by his XA and assist per 90 numbers, but I do think he is a great sort of second assister. So he'll play the pre-assist. He'll find the guy. He'll break the lines for the guy who's out wide, who will then cross it for the guy to score the header. I don't think he has a problem with the final ball per se, but I just think by the nature of where he inhibits on the pitch, where he plays, he sort of will be sort of 40 yards from goal, picking out the guy who's 20 yards, will then find the guy for the tap. And that's not to say if he was sort of to assume the role as the final creator, he would struggle. I think he would be fine in it. But I do think if you're playing to his strengths, you allow him to sort of step off a bit and run the show more.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to his possession and build-up characteristics, because again, this is where another certain player that we will get into later in the show is something that we've missed and something that we hadn't had on this team for a very long time. So give the listeners a little bit about his possession and build-up characteristics.
Yeah, I think this is probably the reason why I sort of quote unquote fell in love with him when watching him for the first time at Rubin. It's just incredibly silky. Is the ability to chop, roll the ball, and then play this 4CR cross ball pass. He is the most important thing, I think, is he's not obviously physically that well equipped to sort of absolute brute players. We mentioned that he has really good balance, so is able to maintain in one-on-one physical duels, but his spatial awareness is so elite, and his ability to sort of see where players are both on his team and the opposition, that he knows where they are. So his ability to sort of turn when he's blind, hit a Cruyff turn, and that, I think in the highlight reel you showed, or at least one of the popular YouTube ones, you see quite a lot of him picking it up on around the halfway line and just doing a blind Cruyff turn and then pinging it to the guy who's on the opposite side or the goal side rather. But no, I think he's a consistent sort of option and build up, both in the sense that he will play safe sometimes when needed, but if he's asked upon to sort of play a killer pass or sort of access the final third, he's adept at doing that and consistent. And when he's playing with teammates who are great and carry a gravitas that forces players to come close to them, he'll have even more space to orchestrate.
Absolutely. And the thing that really turned me on to this player, especially in possession and build-up, was his we'll call it his progressivism, his progressive actions, both in terms of his passing as well as in terms of his ball carrying ability. We haven't had a player that's been able to do that like this since the aforementioned player I keep hinting to, Guilherme. And this is a thing that we've really missed. And it's not something we've really addressed in one player. We've tried to address it in multiple types of players, whether it's a guy like Yann M'vila or a guy like Koundé or a guy like now Kane, with different capabilities that we thought maybe we could put together to get something. But he seems to be able to do it all so well. Whether within his possession, he very nice dribbling ability. I mean, just in that last season with Rubin Kazan, over 50%. It was like 55% in terms of his dribble success. And I mean, it's not just that too. When you also like to see when he loses the ball, how hard does he fight to get the ball back? And every single time he lost the ball, he'd never stop. And that type of passion, that type of aggression or character, as some of us like to call it, is something that we love to see when we have a player like this.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. If you look on the graphic, you look at the ball progression rating, that combines both progressive running, so the dribbling and the passing, and he's well in just about the 90th percentile, which is, for what it's worth, elite. That's absolutely fantastic as the KPI rating. With first dribbling, he's really great, going from sort of the middle, from the defensive third to the middle third, or just from the middle third to the edge of the final third. I do think his ability breaks down slightly when it's in the penalty box, but that's fine, because if he was an absolute wizard in the penalty box, he'd be scoring more goals. He'd be probably playing in a top 5 league, so he can't have everything. And people will understand that. Don't expect to sort of play the ball into him in the final third and expect him to sort of beat 5 players and get a shot off. Do expect him to be able to beat 2 players in the sort of wide channels and open channels of the middle third, and then find the winger or find the forward there. But don't expect him to be able to do it all.
No, I honestly, I don't think anybody expects that of any player that can come to Olympiacos, to be honest with you. But at the very least, in the midfielders, which is something that we're lacking, is that ability to get himself out of a tight spot, especially if we're deep in the midfield. But also, his one-touch ability, pass and move, is also impressive. We've had quite a few players come through here in the last couple of years that don't have that ability. And the result has been we see some very droll, very slow build-up. But Hwang in-beom is a player that can get himself out of a pinch, and he also can play the ball very quick, pass and move. And you need players like this if you want to see what was it called? Jogo Bonito, right? If you want to see some good ball, you need people that have that ability, that can play it quick, one touch, pass and move. And he certainly seems to have that ability.
Yeah, I think he's sort of a perfect composite to play a quick possession-based system. He's able to both scan well, play it quickly first time. Also not sort of select the passing which is appropriate. He knows the limits of his teammates, especially at Ruben and Vancouver. He was quite often, obviously, technically above some of his teammates, but he's not going to play a pressured pass to someone who's unable to sort of be composed in the situation. And I do think for a team like Olympiacos, who have such extended possession for a long time domestically, the ability to play it first time, to play the challenging pass, to play under pressure when you have 2 or 3 men doubling or tripling up on you is incredibly important. It probably wasn't so important to Ruben as it would be to Olympiacos, but I think that's probably one of the probably most attractive things to the scouts that when Olympiacos were watching him was his ability to sort of evade and navigate pressure, because as it's just nature when you're the best team by far in Greece and you have these teams who have a fifth or a sixth of the budget of Olympiacos, you can't blame them when they sort of put 10 guys behind the ball and they put 2 guys to go and just like assault the ball carrier.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to his more defensive attributes. We brought up earlier when we discussed the player profile how he is actually bigger than we thought he was. He seems small, and he is actually thinner than we expected, because he actually plays when he's in some of those tighter areas and he's more in a physical confrontation with another player. He doesn't play like a smaller player. Explain to the listeners how you saw his defensive ability.
I think he's quite passive and really smart. I think that's communicated by, you see the massive red bar under the defensive part of the graph. That's defensive dual success. And that outweighs everything else. He's pretty good at challenging the passing lanes rather, but he is smart. Obviously, he has an ability to sort of be stronger than what he looks like, even though he looks quite small, but he does realize that he isn't an all-round fantastic defender. He knows his limitations. He works very hard to counteract them with his work ethic, intelligence, and timing. But if he was a fantastic defender, he would be somewhere in a top 5 league. And I think this is the big limiting factor for him as so far as playing in a top 5 league. But that isn't to say that it's a massive weakness for a team like Olympiacos, because they're able to mask that just by the sense that they have possession for so long, and they have some effective defenders and defensive mids who could cover for him. But I do think it's certainly not a weakness for Olympiacos. But in a sense, when someone might ask Ari or I, we're describing him as the perfect player so far, well, what's the limiting factor, or why does he have the glass ceiling? I do think it's that he's not an amazing defender, but he is an intelligent one who works hard and he knows his game.
And I will add on to that with regards to, maybe him not being the best defender or the most physically able defender, but with regards to the balance that the team has and what we need, we don't necessarily need another. We have a bunch of 6s on this team already, like pure defensive midfielders that can do that type of work. Technically, a guy like Bukhalakis is a guy that can do that. Mamadou Kane, that seems to be his only job that he's had with us since preseason, is to be more on the defensive side of things. Even I will argue Yann M'vila is on more that side of things, despite the fact that he's a much better distributor of the ball. And actually he is, in many cases, the glue that holds what buildup we do have together. But I don't see that we necessarily need to have somebody that is the best ball winner. You know what I mean? In terms of the defensive attributes, we need somebody whose positioning is quite well, and he can move and get an understanding with his fellow midfielders. But what we do need is somebody that is very good in build-up. And from what I saw when it came to his positioning and his ability to anticipate where the ball was going, I was impressed. I was pleased. You can see it right there with his interceptions and in terms of some of the other defensive attributes. They're quite good, and that's where his strengths are. And if that's where his strength is, and not so much on the physical ability, I'm going to take that, because I believe that balances out the midfield better than what we have so far.
Yeah, as I said, smart defender, challenges the passing lanes. And I think the best way to put it is he carries his weight defensively. He's not one who's not going to track his runner, and when they get into the penalty box, they're going to go score, because he takes it personally almost. It's equivalent to watching like Patrick Beverley when you play in basketball. Not the sense that he's the absolute dog in that sense, but he does take it quite personally. As you mentioned, when he loses the ball, he runs after it. If he's told to stay on someone, he will do so until the end of the game, until either one of them is just absolutely tired and run ragged and needs to be subbed off. But yeah, there's certainly not a weakness in per se in the shape or in the team defensively. But if you've signed in-beom to play as a ball-winning 6, you've sort of missed the memo. But obviously Olympiacos haven't, because there's a plethora of them and some who are good quality at what they do.
Exactly. Now, we've gone into some of the general player attributes and the characteristics. Now is the part that everybody's been asking for, the player comparisons. So, Patrick, you actually did a couple for us already. And we have a very nice graph here comparing Hwang in-beom and Mady Camara. So go ahead, give us some of the insights that you had with the player comparison.
Yeah, just so obviously both team colors are quite different. Just to make sure everyone knows, the in-beom's the larger radar for this one. He's the slightly dark red, whereas Mady Camara is the lighter red. I almost find it's a bit sad, considering you look at the sort of shriveled and tepid Mady Camara radar, considering how large that radar would have been just a year and a half ago. Yeah. But what we do see, at least in a comparison, if we're looking at just pure benchmarking and profiling, is that they play the same amount of passes, which is an important thing to consider, because if you're going to see a player who's playing like twice as many passes, he's obviously going to get more assists and progressive passes. But even though they're playing the same number of passes, in-beom is clearly the better progressive passer. Smart passing as well, which is defined as a sort of penetrating line-breaking pass. He's getting more expected assists. He's more successful both in offensive and defensive dual success. And that's just qualitative and not as a quantity thing. The only thing Camara has him on is dribble success, which is barely an XG. And the thing about Camara is he has a really high XG, but he didn't score a goal this season. So it's kind of all relative. So he's getting these good positions. And you have to assume, let's say, Camara plays as an 8, that will be in-beom's XG. Camara is a good sort of attacking movement, but so is in-beom. So I think that's almost not even a slight on in-beom that his XG is lower than Camara's. I think we see if he plays in that role, he's going to be a tangible, or be provided with tangible goal scoring opportunities.
And you're absolutely 100% right. Regarding the XG, what's the point of getting into all these goal scoring positions if you can't actually do anything with it? And I'm not gonna lie, when you first shared with me the data, in the beginning I thought that the larger web was the Mady Camara web of 2019-2020. That's what I thought I was looking at.
Yeah,
it was. But so what I want to make sure that everybody kind of gets from this is that what we see in in-beom from these graphics is what we saw of the best of Mady, at least in terms of the data point of view. And this is really important to me because when Mady was at his best for us, he had the makings of a fantastic player. There were a couple of times that I shamelessly called him, the next Yaya Toure, with respect to that, because I believed in him so much in those best. And I think the data with respect to what in-beom offers, because of how similar it was to Mady's maps from 2019-2020, I think that's a very huge and very important aspect for people to focus on. Now, the next comparison you made is to another very important player, Yann M'vila. Now, give us some of the insights you had with this.
Yeah, I think this one, the in-beom and Camara graphic, I think it's the best profile for profile in a stylistics chance, because obviously stats to an extent show the player and their ability, but a lot of it is dictated by tactical profiling. So if you want a guy who plays as a 6, he's always going to have less expected goals and expected assists, and will have a higher just total pass percentage and passes per 90 qualitative, which we see here. M'vila is just a different sort of midfielder than in-beom. Despite this, he still manages to get a decent amount of XG, more than in-beom, which we can mention is even encouraging again, because we've seen 2 of 3 consistent members of Olympiakos midfield 3 are averaging consistently more XG. So you'd assume in-beom will scale up to similar rates to them. But besides that, he does really well to keep with Yann M'vila, who in my eyes is probably the best midfielder in the best team in the league, whereas in-beom was the best midfielder on the second worst team in the league. And he's still getting more line-breaking passes. He's overall seems to be a more consistent defender, both quantitative and qualitative. He's challenging the passing lanes as much as M'vila is, although as natural, what you consider with M'vila, he's that sort of build-up option for Olympiacos primary. So he has a higher number of progressive passes, total passes, and pass accuracy. But that is no fault on in-beom's, because M'vila does that job really well for Olympiacos.
No, exactly. And the important thing, the important patterns that we see here are actually, they were very important patterns also when we first brought Yann M'vila in, and we were comparing Yann M'vila to a Guilherme. And we saw things like this. We said, well, wait a minute. It looks like a guy like Yann M'vila is somebody that he can sit back and he can pepper the ball around, but he has maybe a little bit less of some of the more physical progressive actions, not like passing, but I mean more like dribbling, getting the ball forward himself. maybe even in terms of things like XG or other types of defensive dual success. Yann M'vila is more of a with the ball at his feet. I don't want to say more passive because I don't like using that word in possession, but he's a guy that will receive the ball deeper and pepper the ball out, or at least that's how he's been since he's been at Olympiacos. Less of the midfielder that will get the ball, go forward, and be more active in all aspects, like Mady used to be for us, or at least was more successful in. And we see a lot of that in the comparisons with the Webs here. And then that brings us to our very next comparison, which is between Hwang in-beom and Guilherme. You've kind of heard us talking about so many similarities already between Hwang in-beom and Guilherme. And furthermore, you guys loaded the DMs when we put the poll out, and you guys had asked us questions about him. Is this guy close to Guilherme? Is he close? Is this going to give us what we've been missing? And so what we have here are just some basic statistics comparing Hwang in-beom's his season, that the time he spent at Rubin Kazan last season, and Guilherme's statistics during the 2019-2020 season. So this is the best of what Guilherme offered us at this time here with Hwang in-beom while he was playing for a relegation side that was doing very poor and was relegated, I believe, correct, Patrick, after he left?
Yeah, they finished second bottom. Obviously, it all fell apart after he and a few of the cast left, but still, even at their best, they were no better than the sort of mid-table team this season.
Exactly. And here you have some of the data here. So a lot of the things that we used to laud Guilherme for, in respect to at least the quantity of opportunities, Hwang in-beom is at the very least there, or in some cases better, when it comes to shot assists, shot creation, or we'll say shot contribution. Almost double the incidence of Guilherme. And this was something that we valued from Guilherme when he was here. And you brought up how Hwang in-beom in the final third, okay, maybe that's not his best area. It's more in the buildup. Well, if that's not his best area, and he's already got double the incidence rates of Guilherme, seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, it's looking good. I mean, obviously, I'm not incredibly familiar with Guilherme's game as much as to Hwang in-beom's, but the numbers present a pretty specific case, and it's that they're neck and neck. Guilherme's got some bits, Hwang in-beom's got others, but when you provide context, the fact that Hwang in-beom's able to even compete with Guilherme is a credit to him and a testament to his ability, and just reason for the Olympiacos listeners to be even more excited that the idea that he will scale up his contribution when he joins.
Exactly. And one other point regarding at least the goal creation statistics, some of the similarities I saw between Guilherme and Hwang in-beom was when they did get into that final third, because it's not like Guilherme was there all the time anyway, but when they were there, their ability to be able to get by a defender and play a ball to somebody for whether it was a quick shot, I felt like I forgot sometimes when I was watching Hwang in-beom that it wasn't Guilherme. I even had to watch old Guilherme tape just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. And the similarity with regards to that part of their game was absurd. And regarding the possession and buildup, I mean, everything you were talking about regarding his buildup, it's almost everything we expected from a guy like Guilherme. And now, of course, again, the data doesn't tell us everything that we see on the field, but look at their volumes. It's not that much different. And again, I'm going to remind everybody, because some people say, oh, look, Guilherme was 20% higher in terms of his attempted distribution rate. Okay, maybe. But again, Hwang in-beom was playing for a relegation side, and he's attempting 50 passes a game. Imagine what he'll do with a side that maintains more and more possession. Okay, Guilherme had 90% pass accuracy. He wasn't playing for a relegation team. So the way I look at this is the guy is holding a candle while playing for a team that was in the bottom tier of Russian football. That means something to me. And the fact that he scales up with Guilherme and all of these things, and I see so much similarity, the way it comes out on the field does nothing but sell me for this player.
Yeah, I got to agree with everything you're saying, at least from an outsider's context or POV. If I'm looking at with none of my Olympiacos sort of faith that I've sort of built up over the past few years watching the podcast, I would say this is objectively a fantastic move for Olympiacos getting this guy in, and for in-beom as well. I think something that out of the field to note is that Just at least an anecdotal story. I was at the Rangers versus Tottenham game last weekend, and I saw a considerable number of South Korean fans there going to watch Hwang Min-son, even though obviously Hwang In-beom isn't at the same rate as Hwang Min-son in sort of stardom and mass hysteria in Korea. I think this will lead to some amount of jersey sales, some amount of pay-per-view and watching in Korea, which can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. And one last remark I'll make, the one small difference I saw between Hwang In-beom and Guilherme with regards to buildup, and it was really only in one thing, and that was when there were plenty of times deep when Guilherme would get the ball and he would be getting pressed by maybe 2 or 3 players, and he had the confidence and the ability, he would switch the ball to the other side of the field with remarkable accuracy. Hwang In-beom had the preference to just dribble through that. Just something I noticed. Not that that's a knock on his ability or especially his long ball ability. It was just one difference I saw with regards to their buildup.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And the last thing, of course, is the defensive attributes. You brought up kind of how Hwang In-beom is a jack of all trades, and okay, maybe he's not the best defender, the most physical defender, but in terms of his positioning and his ability, it's complementary to what we have here. And Guilherme's defensive ability and his work rate defensively for us was highly valued at this club. So I'm going to point out again, for a relegation candidate team, look at the numbers that Hwang In-beom had compared to Guilherme. Now, obviously, there's a lot of context here. Sure, our team was pressing higher, much higher press, which also could increase the incidence of tackling as well as interceptions. But just the number of successful tackles, because these are successful tackles, by the way, not total defensive duels. We're only putting the successful ones here. It's still remarkable, despite the fact that there is context missing.
Yeah, I agree. If you're sort of compounding the 3 slides you've seen so far, it's the fact that you can get a guy who Guilherme good for Olympiacos, and it's perhaps much maligned the fact there's an absence of that sort of profile, and you can hold a candle to him, as you said. I like that term. Is about as good a cosign as you can get within the Olympiakos context for the past few seasons.
Exactly. And this deep dive's it's the longest deep dive we've done, but there was just so much exciting stuff to cover here. We're on to the last part.
Go ahead. One thing just before for the similarity thing. If you look at the first graphic that we looked at, the overall graphic, and had the sort of 6 KPI ratings, I have a similarity rating thing with those KPIs, and I've spit out a few names in the sort of broad sample size I have, which has about 30 leagues. It doesn't cover the top 5 leagues, but covers the majority of good football outside of that. And some names that came up similar to Hwang In-beom, as like the top 5 most similar, are incredibly optimistic from Olympiacos POV. You've got Franco Cristaldo, who plays for Huracan in Argentina. He's probably one of the best midfielders in South America right now. You've got Joey Veerman, who starts for PSV. You've got Nico Capaldo, who's the Salzburg midfielder, who's worth like 6, 7, 8 million euros. You've got Matias Nunes, the Sporting Club de Portugal midfielder, who is linked with Chelsea for 40 million. And finally, we've got Szymanski, who played for Dynamo Moscow, who's on loan at Feyenoord now, who's worth 10, 15 million euros. And the fact that these 2 guys are all in possession dominant quality teams, and Hwang In-beom's coming up in a cluster of similar players to them, again, is just reason to be optimistic, albeit again, this is all numbers, and that's the majority of the POV. And some people can pick some faults in that, and that's completely valid. It's still reason, I think, to get optimistic.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And really quickly, the value proposition and risk here, guys, this is the closest player I have seen to Guilherme since Guilherme left. I'm going to say that now. We brought it up multiple times in the show already. I am 100% on board with this player. This is it right here. He is the golden, or more like silver nugget. This is Hwang In-beom right here. I'm so excited about this player, guys. It's the player I've been the most excited for, even more excited than for a guy like Vrsaljko, who had so much quality coming in. I'm really pumped. I think we finally have found the player that can at least attempt to replace what Guilherme produced for us. And I am super excited, guys. Anyway, now that we're at the end of the deep dive, I want to thank everybody for listening along with this. This is one of the longer deep dives that we've had, but there was so much good content here. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure having you.
No, thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to speak about a player I like, joining a team I like.
Absolutely. And like I said, guys, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that button on the bottom, the little bell to ring anytime that we go live so you can get more content like this. We're going to be doing more deep dives. We have Doran Ledner that just signed, so I have another deep dive coming out for that. Patrick, maybe you want to join me for that one too.
Yeah, we'll see. I'll definitely share some graphics because, funny enough, he was linked with Rangers a few weeks ago before we filled up our left back spot with a different guy.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll do another one of these duets, as it were. It'll be really fun.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. Time difference is a bit awkward, but
it is.
I don't stay up to talk about good football. Hopefully this time will be the week after you guys beat Slovan or something.
There you go. I hope so. You hope so. Your mouth to God's ears, as they say, right? Anyway, take care, everyone. This is Gate 7 International by the fans for the fans. We'll see you next time.